Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Diane de Anda. She is here to celebrate her beautiful new picture book. It's called 21 Cousins. Hey, before we invite Diane into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media. Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids. At Jedley Magic on Twitter, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram. We love interacting with all of you on social media. Oh, I almost forgot about our Pinterest page. It really has some great information for you. Also, please be sure to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Find out what's coming up in the show. Find out what you might have missed and download some great free material. You're also going to be the first to know whenever we have a live event coming up. And we have two great live events coming up. August 28th, we will be at Connect Fest at the Cape Cod Fairgrounds in Falmouth, Massachusetts. That's a free event, but you do need tickets. They have a capacity. So go to fuseconcerts.org to get your free tickets and join us at our Reading With Your Kids booth at Connect Fest. On September 18th, we will be in downtown Lowell, Massachusetts for the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. We can't wait for this event. It's going to be so much fun. That's a free event too. Find out all about these happenings at our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Joining us right now from Los Angeles in California, our guest today is the author of 13 really beautiful children's books. The latest book is called 21 Cousins. Please welcome to the show, Diane de Anda. Diane, bienvenidos. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here with everyone.
I was sharing with Diane, and my audience has heard this in the past. You know, I receive literally hundreds of books, many unsolicited here at the Reading With Your Kids studios. And my wife, who's been a teacher, a special needs teacher in the Boston Public Schools for 34 years, will take a look. And she has any books that come in that she likes for her classroom, she has first dibs on. And when 21 Cousins came up, it absolutely caught her eye, and she went through it, and she said, yep, this is going into my classroom library.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear.
So,
and I do include children with special needs as well in the book.
Yes, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about 21 Cousins, please.
Well, the idea came when I was thinking about the stereotypes. Mm-hmm. Growing up, because I'm fair-complected with dark hair, people would ask me the rude question, what are you, right? Yes. And then when I would tell them, at that time, it depends whether what era, whether I was Chicana or Mexican-American, they'd say, but you don't look blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. And so after a while, I would make a snarky comment like, we come in all colors. You know, so, I had thought about that over the years. And then I began to look at some of the books that were coming out, even from Arte Publico Press. They had one on cousins, and all the cousins looked the same. Mm. Well, all the cousins in my family did not look the same. Mm-hmm. We all looked different. Mm-hmm. And it was not a point that was any issue. That's just the way it was. Yep. And so I decided that I needed to work on this issue of stereotyping. And I wanted a book that would address that. But not just address appearance, that I wanted people to understand that within a family, you have different talents, you have different abilities, and as growing up, you have all these, and yet the cousins interact and appreciate these. Mm-hmm. And that was the aim behind this particular book.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, I mentioned to Diane beforehand, my beautiful wife, his family is originally from Puerto Rico. And I wasn't aware of it, but I probably was one of those folks who would, just assume all people with the label of Latino or Hispanic, again, depending on what year you were talking about, I'll just fit underneath the same tent. And it was all just one culture. And what I quickly discovered is that, no, Latino culture is actually just a rainbow of different cultures. Even within Mexico, there are all sorts of different cultures. And Puerto Rican culture is different than Dominican, which is different than Cuban, and Peruvian, and Salvadoran, and they're all beautiful cultures. And they're. I just love the fact that I kind of got the key and was allowed to join the club.
Welcome. Now, one of the things is, yet there are unifying factors.
Yep.
There is an overall, umbrella that all these cultural groups fit into.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, particularly in reference to values,
mm-hmm.
and the very strong value of family
mm-hmm.
that comes through in all of it, whatever iteration it happens
yep.
to be, that comes through very, very strongly. And also, one issue is personalismo. Personalismo means you deal with people on a personal basis. So if I'm going to call the bank and I want them to take a charge off my bank, I really hope it's a Latino, because he's more likely to interact with me on a personal basis rather than as someone who belongs to this particular corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And it cuts across that way. You'll see this. And my husband learned this very quickly over the time. He said, "Oh, are you sure?" I said, "Oh, absolutely." And he says that to me. Yes, that personalismo is a very strong thing. But there are big differences. In Mexico, for example, it just starts in the front of the book kind of explaining. There are children narrators, first of all,
mm-hmm.
child narrators. And they explain that the reason why people look different is because Latinos and particularly Mexicans, are mestizo, which means they're a combination of all the different groups that came into Mexico. So you have the indigenous peoples, you have the French, you have the Spanish. My grandmother used to talk about the Chinese that were there.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all these different groups that are there. And so that's why you end up with people that look all different kinds of ways, because these people intermarried.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very big difference. And I think a way that really differentiates it from the United States in many ways, the intermarriage that happened in Mexico.
Yeah. It's beautiful, and I'm really happy that you created 21 Cousins, because I think it's a great way for families to start, just talking to kids about we're all different, but we are all family, and we're not only just talking about Latinos, but we're all part of this big, beautiful human family.
That's right, and it was very, very important for me not to just focus on appearance. Though someone said, "Oh, why did you call someone morena and someone else güera?" The güera is someone who's fair-skinned, fair-haired, mm-hmm. and morena is someone who's darker-skinned. I said, well, look at those two girls that I talked about. I talked about how beautiful they are,
mm-hmm.
right? And the morena, I talk about her and talk about she looks best in her turquoise dress because it brings out her beautiful brown skin.
Mm-hmm.
And my closest friend for 52 years was a morena. And whenever I'd buy her a blouse, I'd buy her a turquoise blouse because it made her look beautiful.
Yeah. Now, have you heard from any folks here in the States who might be horrified that you're calling attention to somebody's complexion? Because I think that's especially nowadays, it's a big taboo here in the States.
Oh, yeah, it's not PC. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
It's politically correct. The only one that I heard a tiny bit of that in a very positive review was a reviewer who mentioned, that not that she complained about it, but she said some people might object to using terms like güera and morena, that they're not politically correct. But direct criticism I have not heard. It's still relatively new out there, so I have not heard that. Another reviewer who I guess is very familiar with Latino culture understood that nicknames are also used too, a lot of times in Latino culture. So you'll see nicknames sprinkled through here. And if people refer to someone as Morena, there are lots of songs in Spanish from Mexico that talk about, sing praises of the beautiful Morena that they're in love with, So I think people don't really understand how it is used in the culture.
Yeah, it is a very different culture. It's something that kind of took me by surprise the first time that I experienced that, but it's coming from a place of love and affection.
Yes. Yeah. Now, that's not to say that there are not sometimes people who make distinctions and look upon someone who's light-skinned in a more positive way, because you have that of all people, irrespective of what culture, and you'll find some of those people as well too. Those are generally people who are interested in social climbing and acculturation, I think. And then you have others who feel that, it's not politically correct to talk about these types of differences. Well, I think it's wrong not to talk about differences.
Yeah.
And pretend like the elephant isn't in the room.
One of the differences that I experience, and it's a really beautiful difference, is that I find that here in the States, that the generations are really kind of separate. There are certainly places like Disneyland where you'll see, a family get together. But in terms of music, it's, there's music that's targeted at old folks and middle-aged folks and teenagers, and there's not a lot of intergenerational stuff going on. And meanwhile, in Latino culture, I see lots of family. Every event is a family event, and there's grandparents and parents and kids and teenagers.
It's intergenerational.
Yeah, and I love that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you as well. But when you're talking about music, one of the characters, Catalina, is a dancer. That's her skill and ability. And I made sure that she dances hip hop, ballet, salsa, and with castanets. So she is what these children are what I call bicultural. They've been biculturally socialized, both into mainstream society and into Latino culture. So they have a foot in both cultures as well. They fit very well into American culture as well, because that's part of who they are as well too. And you can do that without losing your culture of origin.
Yeah.
As
absolutely.
well. Yeah. The important thing too is I want to stress. I purposely stressed more than appearance. I did it just as a descriptive thing, not, look at the differences. I just said, I'm just describing each kid. And then we go into their abilities and their talents and their skills. Because that's what I wanted to emphasize as well. Diversity here that is really important, not just on a personal level, but for society. Look at all the potential you have in children. Look at all these abilities. You have the techie who can fix everyone's computer in the family, right? You have the drummer who is fantastic and has long hair with curls that kind of bounce up and down. You have the guy who wants to run in the Olympics and he shaves his head. So every time you see a Latino kid with a shaved head, he's not a homeboy necessarily. He may be just getting ready for the Olympics someday in his imagination. And so you have, and then there's the girl who wins the spelling bee. And she's in a wheelchair, but nowhere in that page do we say that she is in a wheelchair. We just say she rolled up the stage to get her thing, because her disability does not define who she is. So you see her with her award and whatever, and she's in a wheelchair, but that does not define who she is. So one of the things I'm interested in is looking at all the potential of these children. What society loses if they don't help them with their potential to develop it. Look at all, not only do they lose, but look at all society would lose if their potential were not developed and not appreciated. So what I want is an appreciation of diversity of all different kinds and see how it in fact adds to society.
So important, and it's another reminder of how important it is for us to invest in kids, especially at early ages, because we are going to spend the money one way or the other. You use the term homeboy. We had Father Greg Boyle on the show, who is the founder of Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention program in the world. And if we're not investing in the kids at an early age with early education and making sure that every kid is reading on grade level, we're going to be paying for it when they become older teenagers and adults. And unfortunately, we'll be paying for it to keep them in prisons. And it makes a lot more sense to invest in kids when they're younger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
You, in addition to being a children's author, you've been a social worker, and you're a huge advocate for adolescent violence prevention. You've also a professor of social work, and you've edited 4 books on multicultural social work. Has a lot of that experience influenced and inspired the children's books that you've written?
Oh, absolutely. The couple of books just before this, one is Mango Moon, and it's a story of a young girl narrator who tells what happened to her family when her father was picked up and put in detention for deportation. Mm. And so you go with her from her perspective. And a lot of times I have children narrators because I want that particular perspective. You go with her, and it's not maudlin, but you see the kind of things that the family goes. You see that the mother gets a second job, so the kids become latchkey kids, right? Because she has to make up for the income. But it's not enough, so they can't keep the house. They have to move in with relatives. And so you go through the whole thing. How did they keep up communication? But what's important is also see how the mother tries to help them understand what's going on and also maintain the relationship so they understand that love continues even across boundaries. The second one is the one I wrote after that, just before this one, is The Day Abuelo Got Lost. Abuelo means grandfather. Mm-hmm. And so what you do is this time it's a boy child narrator, and you're going with him on his day as he interacts with his grandfather. But you begin to realize as the things change that they're doing, that the grandfather's going more and more into dementia. You know, he forgets to turn off the stove, so he can't make quesadillas for them. They have to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? In the middle of his story, he forgets where he is, the stories he tells, and he gets his little boy's dog confused with his dog when he was a little boy. So you see things gradually. Then you see how the mother explains it to the boy and explains that someday he may not even recognize him, but that doesn't mean he can't feel his love. Mm-hmm. Wow. And so what I try to do as a social worker, I was, and a social work educator, I saw the different kinds of issues that children and families, my expertise was in children and families, had to deal with. And so I try and these give me ideas on the kind of books that need to be out there. I mean, I write light-hearted books as well, too. But I also think it's important, and I have a friend who teaches children's literature at a university here, and she says that's a new trend in children's books is really dealing with actual problems or issues. You don't even have to say problems, just issues that families and children have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And it's becoming more and more in children's literature where it wasn't before. It was kind of more fluffy. Right. There was an occasional, Beverly Cleary made sure that she put some important things in there too, I know. But these, and before that, Arte Publico Press got a grant, and we did for writing stories because, they were concerned about the issues of childhood obesity and diabetes, which were very high in Latino communities. And so there was a grant from California Foundation and another to write books to this. So we wrote books on nutrition in a story form, so I wrote A Day Without Sugar, where the family goes on, the cousins with their aunt goes on a hunt for hidden sugar. Another one was Patchwork Garden, where little girl and her grandmother figure out there are little patches through the neighborhood where people can plant little gardens. They're in the city where there isn't much space, but you can find a little space. So it's like her patchwork garden, the patchwork quilt that her grandmother's making. Mm-hmm. You have these different little pieces that they get other children involved in developing these little teeny gardens, because we know in the inner cities that there's really a problem with getting fresh vegetables, for example, and fruit. So these are the types of things that I've written about. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we've talked a lot about here on the podcast is, books, reading with kids, it's really beneficial, of course, to help them develop a love of reading, to help them learn how to read, vocabulary. But it's also a great way to start conversations that can last a lifetime. And, we've talked about how important it is for kids to see themselves positively represented in the pages of books. But I think it's just as important for kids who aren't part of that culture to see their neighbors positively portrayed and to address issues so that we can have those conversations that weren't spoken about when I was a kid. No one ever died. No one ever gets sick. No one ever went to the hospital. There was no mental illness.
There's always a happy ending.
Always a happy ending. And and so when it happened, we couldn't talk about it. Now it's so important for us to be able to help our kids understand that, wow, your classmate may be dealing with this or with that, and we need to have empathy for them and understanding.
I agree. Yeah, one of the big things that I'm concerned with is developing empathy in children, so that the themes I have are often universal, but in the context of this particular culture, so that there is an ability to relate across, and then to see someone else's, from their particular lens, which I think is very important for children to begin to do.
Yeah. As you mentioned that, I think what a great conversation a family can have, if it's an Asian family or a Caucasian family, sitting down reading 21 Cousins and just noticing the differences and kind of celebrating that and understanding that these differences are beautiful and that it really adds to the family. But also taking time to look and say, how are we alike? What things do we have in common with this family that we're reading about?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the commonalities are critical to bring out as well.
I have to ask. I think I know the answer, but I might not. I shouldn't assume that. What's more fun for Diane de Anda, to write a children's book like 21 Cousins or to edit a social work book?
Well, they're each a different kind of fun. Okay. It's just a whole different type of mental and emotional exercise, because I wrote, actually, I retired now, so I don't, I was in a publisher parish kind of situation at UCLA. So I wrote, technical articles with statistics and all of that. And it's kind of, I enjoy doing that. It's a good mental exercise and you feel good when you do it, but it's a very different feeling when you put something creative. And I publish short stories and poetry too for adults. So that's another creative, because I was one of these history English people. And then I kind of switched later into the behavioral sciences. So that was, a first love that I came back to.
Wonderful. Oh, I just love this. We talked a little bit, I think it was before the show, about how writing is, really kind of solitary. When you were a professor and an educator, you were getting feedback all the time. What kind of feedback are you getting about 21 Cousins?
Well, the people at Starbrite is very good about sending me reviews and things and podcasts where people have talked about it. So I've gotten a few back. It's still relatively new. It has only been out a few months. So it's relatively new. But, as I told you, before we got on the air, writing is a solitary kind of thing. I do have a friend who is a professor, and she uses a lot of my books in her classes. So they'll have assignments, and she'll send me the things that the students wrote and stuff. And I have a number of books that are also, I have 3 books that are short story collections. And there's one called Immortal Rooster, about my father trying to kill a rooster, my sister and I rescuing it. And some people are horrified. How could you have such a graphic description? And yet some of the people in her class, when I went and made a presentation, came up to me and said, oh, something like that happened in our family too. They were Latinas, of course, and they could relate to it. So it's interesting to see people's very different reaction to the same thing.
Yeah. My beautiful wife had that happen to her when she was a kid too, visiting her grandparents.
Oh, really?
Visiting her grandparents in Puerto Rico. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I will send you, give me your permission, I'll send you a copy of Immortal Rooster and she can read about
Awesome.
The rooster did survive. His neck was a little crooked for the rest of his life, but he survived.
Hey, Diane, please tell everybody where they can go to find out more about 21 Cousins and the other wonderful books that you've created.
Okay, well, they can go to Starbrite Books. It's the first one in their catalog if you go online, and they'll actually show you pictures of it. You can go through and read some of it. If you want to see my other books, you can go to my website, which is simple. It's deandabookshop.com.
Awesome.
And you'll see all the books there.
Yeah.
Along with it, I also have a violence prevention program that I ran with like 10,000 kids. And there's a stress management program for adolescents on that site as well.
Ooh, well, we may have to have you back just to talk about that.
Oh, okay. I would love to come back.
Awesome.
It's been fun.
Awesome. Well, before we go, one of the things that we've suggested to parents here in the podcast is before you read the story, you can cover the words with like one of those sticky note things and just take a picture walk through the book. And look at the pictures with your kids and talk about what do you think the story is about. And I think that this would be a really interesting book to do that with because it's obviously there's a lot of smiles and joys, but really, the kids look different. And so it would be interesting to see what the kids were thinking, just looking at the pictures, and what their reaction would be after they hear the story.
What a very interesting idea. I think that would be a great exercise.
Yeah. I wish I could say that it was my idea, but I was taught that by someone. Well, we've had a great time speaking to the author of 21 Cousins, Diane de Anda. Hey, Diane, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I had a wonderful time here with you.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Pyle Burnham. She'll be here to celebrate Silent Sally Speaks. That's the next episode of the podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, you want to check out our Certified Great Read program. If our panel of teachers, parents, and kids believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read. And with that status comes a number of really powerful promotional tools that can help your book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. Do you know that there are literally thousands of books published every single month? It's really, really hard to get noticed. We can help. Go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to Certified Great Reads. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to start by thanking our guest, Diane de Anda. Be sure to check out 21 Cousins. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.